Hey, good afternoon. This is Leslie Barcus, the Executive Director of VegFund, and we're going to take one quick deep breath before we jump in, maybe just a minute or so, to see if others may join. But for those of you out there in viewing land, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. I never know. One would think that my computer would be synced with the actual time out there in the world, but I'm never entirely sure. So I usually give us just even a minute or so to take a pause before we dive in. And I can see more people are joining, so I'm glad we're waiting for just a hot moment. Okay, hot moment passed, so let's dig in. So again, I'm Leslie, the Executive Director of VegFund, and we're really, really pleased this afternoon to have Chetana Mirle join us. Chetana joined us about a year ago as one of our board members, and she is a fantastic addition to the VegFund board, and we're very pleased that she could join us today. So I'll give Chetana a quick introduction, and then we'll dive in with some, really hard questions. And, if we can't answer those questions during the course of our conversation, let's not be stressed out. We'll write them down and try to get back to you at a later time. So before I introduce Chetana, if you want to just put in the comments or the chat where you're joining us from today, what's your physical location, that would be wonderful, just to see where everybody's coming in. So Chetana Mirle, the wonderful person you see on your screen, truly is an advocate for all animals and the environment. She did join the VegFund board about a year ago, and we're just absolutely thrilled because she comes to the board with just wonderful grounding in working for farmed animals in her prior capacity she led the farm animal protection movement and worked with local activists in Asia, Africa, and Latin America for Humane Society International. So she's worked with a host of government stakeholders, the financial sector, and in the food industry. She presently is working as a program director for Spring Point Partners in Philadelphia for a program called The Life of Riley, which is an animal welfare program. And as well, she has a PhD. She also cares a lot about humans. She has a PhD from the Friedman School of Nutrition, Science, and Policy at Tufts University. And she, in her dissertation, worked on the link between donor-funded agricultural programs and household food consumption in South Asia. Really importantly for us, she's the trustee of the awesome Vegan Foundation, just to tell you how awesome Chetana is, because she is. And she does advocate not only on behalf of animals, but equally on behalf of children in foster care, where she volunteers as a court-appointed special advocate in Philadelphia. So Chetana, really comes at life from many angles, and we're so pleased to have her as a board member and to have her join us today. And I just want to note that when we asked Chetana to join us, we said, hey, we just want to really hear from you in your personal capacity as a VegFund board member. So her thoughts and comments are in that light today. They're not necessarily representative of her present employment or anything maybe she's done in the past, all of which are completely wonderful things. So, but she really has joined us in her personal capacity, and we'll try to structure her thoughts and questions to Chetana in that regard. So, someone says, Deanna Mailer, she has a fan. Chetana is one of her favorite people. So see, we have others who agree with us. Thank you, Deanna. We all agree too. We have folks joining from Chicago, Toronto. There's one of my homies from Ohio. I grew up in Ohio. Another board member from Baltimore. Someone from Brazil. That's fantastic. DC. Someone from South Africa, I bet, who knows Chetana. Nicola Vernon. So we've really kind of got some folks from all over the world, and we're really, really pleased that you've joined us. So Chetana, before we dive in, is there anything you would like to add to your introduction?
No, that's it, except that I'm also seeing a lot of my favorite people in the comment box too.
Oh, great. So we have a love fest going on here, which is wonderful. So thanks everybody for joining. If I could just start out, so what really motivated your passion to work for, predominantly animals through much of your career?
I have always had a soft spot for animals, but I think, I never knew I could do it as a career. I'd always loved animals, and I had always connected to the fact that animals suffer in the same way that we can suffer. And animals feel in the same way that we feel. I think I grew up with that ethic. I think I actually got it from my grandfather. But I never actually realized this was something that you could do as a job. I was not part of the animal advocacy movement. I became vegan because one of my bosses, when I was an intern at an environmental organization, was vegan. And so I became vegan because I was inspired for her, but I would say for the next 3 or 4 years, she was the only vegan I knew. And the next vegan I met was my husband, and I was the only other vegan he knew. So this was like 20 plus years ago. And so I didn't actually realize it was a movement until, I got my first job at Humane Society International. I saw it advertised and I was like, wait, people can advocate on behalf of animals for a living. So it was kind of a gift to find out that I could dedicate my whole life to animals.
Fantastic. Well, obviously, we're just all lucky that you jumped into that field, and we all benefit, from having you as one of our peers in the animal rights, animal welfare sector. So fantastic. But you spoke about kind of marrying your husband and learning maybe 20 years ago that you could be a vegan, but then you had this journey of working for Humane Society International. So it sounds as if it is a real journey. And so how do you feel about grassroots activism and the role of grassroots activism in that journey for people in trying to lead people to vegan living?
I've always felt like grassroots activists are the unsung heroes of our movement. I spent much of my career working on big global campaigns, which have an incredibly important role in the vegan and animal protection movement as well. But I think in terms of grassroots activism has an equally important role, because I think in terms of changing hearts and minds on the ground and creating a supportive environment for people, not just to learn about veganism, but for people to stay vegan, I think that's a role that only grassroots groups on the ground can fill. So to some extent, I feel like grassroots activism holds up all of the other kinds of activism and all of the big global campaigns, which are so critical. All of the national level campaigns, so critical to our movement, even the whole plant-based foods movement from kind of a market perspective, all critical to our movement, but I also think they are all very dependent on the grassroots activism of people on the ground. And I think that's why I'm so excited to be a part of VegFund, because I've always felt that way and I've always really wanted to somehow be a part of supporting this type of activism.
Thank you. So when you were at Humane Society International, you did work with local activists, correct?
Yes,
So
I did.
how did you balance, and how was the work with them different than perhaps the role you were playing with different corporations or governments, if you feel free to speak about that?
Sure.
How did it all come together?
I worked with, I can kind of give an example of groups. One of the groups that I met on the ground, I remember I was working in Vietnam and I wanted to work on farm animal welfare and I didn't know whom to work with. And so another colleague introduced me to, like through friends of friends, to a group of people who were just rescuing cats and dogs off the street. And the group was not entirely vegan, especially when they started, they certainly were not vegan, but there were 1 or 2 people in the group who were vegan. And they kind of spread that message to the other community of cat and dog, of companion animal rescuers in that group. And they started holding events and showing videos. And they started inviting people to, they started serving vegan food at these events, started translating videos like Earthlings and Peaceable Kingdom and showing those videos, showing those movies at events. And they not only invited other rescue people, but they invited their friends and their family. And then the rescue people invited their friends and their family. And I would say in a year, they probably didn't have an attendance beyond like 500 at all of those events combined. But I think that they had a ripple. I think organizations like this have a ripple effect throughout their cities and throughout their communities. So here's this community of people, all of whom have heard about veganism, regardless of whether or not they've gone 100% vegan. They've heard about it, they've heard about the reasons why, and they're supportive, and they're starting to talk about it in all of their networks beyond those 500 people. And their networks could include people who work for major food companies, people who work for governments. And so when someone like me in that role comes in from a major global organization and wants to work on policy change, either with a corporation or with a major food company, there are already people that I'm meeting with who have heard about this issue and who are open to talking about it and open to hearing about it, because groups like that rescue group have kind of spread the message throughout their community. And even if they haven't turned everyone vegan, they've opened people's minds to being vegan. So I think that was a really powerful interaction. And I think it's also powerful, you know, when you're going into a meeting, especially if you're from like this Western global organization and you're going in and you're talking to a corporation or a government official in that country, it's always helpful to have people on the ground to kind of bring their own narratives and their own take and their own kind of lived experience of being vegan in their culture and why they're being vegan to the table, just to make it more relevant locally.
So yeah, I really appreciate that, you know, and you address the role of networks, because I think as activists, sometimes, you know, we just don't know where our messaging is going, right? We're interacting with the person for a very brief moment in time, and we don't necessarily know about what's happening with that ripple effect. So, you know, what are your views and thoughts about the fact that, you know, we're really doing behavior change work that is not easy to measure? And, you know, you have a role now as a funder of things that involve behavior change. Again, what's your philosophy on how much angst we should have about the work that we are doing and not necessarily having really firm evaluation results on behavior change?
So while I understand the importance of evaluation and measuring impact, because we want to know that what we're doing is making a difference, I don't believe that everything that is worth doing and everything that is worth funding can be measured in terms of number of animals saved, number of people gone vegan, or, you know, amount of greenhouse gas emissions reduced. Like, it just, not everything lends itself to that type of measurement. And I think while we should continue to be, you know, think deeply and be creative about how can we measure, you know, our impact on community engagement. So these ripple effects, are there ways that we can capture these ripple effects? Are there ways that we can capture the benefit of community, of building community around veganism and creating supportive environments? And we don't have ways to capture that yet, but they're so critical to our movement. So I think we continue to talk about it and continue to think about it. But in the meantime, we know how critical that is. And we just continue to fund it, I think. And I think I would not have a lot of angst around that. And also, there are a lot of interventions that we do, especially when they're around community building, relationship building. The stuff that really makes that lasting long-term change, that take years to see the impact of that. You're not going to see the impact of that in one funding cycle or even 2 or 3 funding cycles. It's going to take a really, really long time to have that kind of culture change get into the community. And so I think we should, while continuing to have conversations about ways to measure impact, not get too hung up on measurement. just keep doing the good work that we're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I tend to agree with that because I think, the work that the activists are doing, it is incredibly vital. And as you said, you just never know how that ripple effect is going to play out and where it's going to catch on somewhere down the road, either for the person who was directly experiencing that message or in how the message was communicated to others. So are there any community outreach models or projects or ways of communicating with people that you have found particularly compelling or effective that you can think of?
I think there are lots. I think probably my favorites are the ones that involve building community. So I sometimes volunteer for an organization here in Philadelphia called Peace Advocacy Network, which I think is a VegFund grantee as well. Yeah. And what I love about the organization is that it's not that they're just providing, through their pledge program, their participants with information on. It's great information on how to be vegan, on why you should be vegan, on what products are available in your community. It's an incredible source of information, but I think what's even more powerful is that the people who participate in that program have mentors that they can just talk to and get advice from as they're transitioning and trying to stay vegan. And more importantly, the other people in their cohort. There's just a very intentional effort to create a sense of community. So you have people to talk to as you struggle with your journey, as you kind of fall off the horse and be like, oh, and then I ate a cheese sandwich yesterday or whatever. Like I couldn't find a vegan meal here, and so I just ate cheese. Whatever the issue is, you have a really supportive community to continue to lift you up and carry you through that journey, or even talk you through kind of those difficult moments when the people in your immediate circle, your family, your coworkers may not be supportive about your choice to be vegan. And that can be like a big deterrent to staying vegan. But then you have this new community that this organization has created for you of people who can be like, oh, you know what? My mom said that to me too. Or my coworkers made fun of me too. And you can kind of laugh about it and joke about it, and it starts to feel better. And so it gives you kind of the support that you need to stay on your vegan journey. So that sense of community, like any program that's creating that sense of community, is probably my favorite type of program.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One of our viewers, Veggie Eddie, just said, hey, I've been vegan for a long time. He said 45 years. He's not been sick in 47 years. He's actually a 47-year vegan, he says. But he feels that telling people to adopt a vegan diet is like telling a drug addict to just say no. If I may quote him, he said, it doesn't work. But Veggie Eddie, we take your point, but I guess we're hopeful that if we consider that we're planting some message that maybe advances people along that journey, I think we at VegFund appreciate that in many cases, people don't just hear one message and become vegan, but we're hoping that we're planting seeds that eventually would lead to behavior change, or for those seeds that we're planting as people interact with others, that, something might take hold, and we're putting everyone on that journey. So I think it is very difficult to have one interaction with someone and expect them to be vegan despite the evidence. But we're hoping that as we plant those seeds, something works. And as Chetana just mentioned, having a mentor to help you along that journey and keep you on track is potentially a very vital part of outreach models.
And it also normalizes the conversation, right? So when you have lots of grassroots groups and national groups and everyone talking about veganism from whatever aspect, from the environmental aspect, from the health aspect, from the farm animal welfare aspect, and you're hearing it from multiple perspectives, I think it just starts making that conversation more normal and more acceptable.
Yeah. So are you aware of any real evidence-based grassroots strategies in your work around the world that can be implemented by vegan and plant-based nonprofits? Is there anything that comes to mind there where you say, hey, this was set up, this evidence model, and it really worked out? This is kind of a question we had, from someone who wanted to, I don't know if they could join our event, but they sent the question in.
In terms of evidence-based models, I've seen a lot of models that seem to be having a lot of success. And my guess is in the future, moving forward, the models that are going to have the most success are the models that create partnerships with other kind of non-vegan organizations in the community. And I think that's kind of where we're going next, is looking at ways to create really authentic partnerships with environmental groups, with health groups. I've been really impressed by the number of hospitals recently who have adopted plant-based kind of food policies or just increased in their cafeteria the availability of plant-based foods, making plant-based foods, you know, the standard diet for their patients who are in hospitals. I think these types of models that are working towards institutional change are known to be really effective. Also models that are working with school districts, and that's happening all over the world. Someone said they were from Brazil. It's definitely that has taken off in Brazil in terms of entire school districts adopting a meatless Monday or a plant-based Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday. I think that these are models where we can really see people, if not going vegan, having more and more exposure to plant-based diets and eating less meat, less dairy. So those are exciting. And I think that those are also things that grassroots groups can push for, because there are schools and hospitals and institutions in every single community that are probably ready to take on some plant-based vegan policies.
Thanks. Yeah, one of our viewers, Tiffany, or listeners, I guess I should say, from Diabetes Undone, says they are definitely partnering with hospitals and community groups. So it sounds like others are following that pathway as well. So what kind of advice would you give someone who's just beginning in activism? I think it can be kind of overwhelming and intimidating. But do you have any words of wisdom for people who are just jumping in and want to reach out to the public?
Yeah, I would say two things, and they're related. There are so many different ways of doing activism, and you have to find the one that just feels most authentic and that feels most you, right? So even if you see someone else doing something that is super effective and they're being amazing and successful at it, you don't necessarily have to copy that model of what they're doing. Because you have to find what feels right to you. Even the reason, like, why did you become vegan? Was it for the animals? Was it for the environment? Was it for health reasons? The reason that spoke to you and that made you become vegan is the reason that you're going to be the most passionate advocate for. So just be the most authentic version of yourself, and use the reasoning and the activist techniques, whether it's online, whether it's speaking to people, whatever it is that feels right to you, and you're going to be amazing at it. And so don't worry about copying anyone else's advocacy style. Just be yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. It's really, really great advice. Or if you're going to get in a relationship, be really authentic, right? So I guess that really pretty much holds in all that we do in the human community. Sneakers and Jeans is asking, do you think the word vegan is too threatening? Is it off-putting to people to use that word as we interact with our communities?
I think it depends on your community, right? And that was actually something that I learned when I was working for HSI, is that I sometimes wanted to hold back and be a little bit cautious sometimes about using the vegan word. And there were activists in the UK in particular who were just really frustrated with me and who are kind of like, we are ready to use this word in our community, and it is okay to use this word. And so I think you kind of gauge where your community is at, and your community might not be like a location. Your community might be like you're talking to a group of physicians or you're talking to a group of educators. I think it's going to be different for different people. And I think a big part of advocacy is also listening deeply. So listening deeply to your audience, figuring out where they're coming from in terms of what food culture are they coming from? What are the constraints that they're facing? What has been their experience with the word vegan before? What has been their interaction with vegan activists before? What has been their interaction with people telling them what to eat in general before, right? So I think we listen deeply to where people are coming from and respond to that in terms of what language we're using.
Yeah, thank you for putting that forward, the listening deeply, because, whether it's talking about veganism or politics today, I think, part of the reason that we're really stymied in at least the US society at this time and increasingly globally is because we want to be heard, but we don't necessarily want to listen. And we know that that is so critical in strategic communications, that you've got to have, much as you may not want to, but you've got to have empathy for the person who's on the other side, because they're coming from some place that they've either had an unfortunate experience with, I don't know, veganism or something that affects their willingness or desire or maybe ability to move forward to adopt those kinds of behavior changes. So that is such an absolutely critical point. So thank you for raising that. And we would agree, absolutely wholeheartedly. Damon Isaacs, who's at the Center for Contemporary Sciences, is working to champion technology and shift from animals in research to non-animal methods. He asks, can these evidence-based models work in building our community? And then he said, how can we build a grassroots campaign with our science-based work? Can our work be as appealing as plant-based food? Any thoughts about that?
And again, I think this is who's your community. So regardless of what kind of outreach you're doing, who is your community? So are your community, if you're doing, are you doing outreach to physicians, to cardiologists who are treating heart disease and you want to talk to them about plant-based eating? It's, again, a very different, so that is definitely going to be a science-based approach that you take with them. And with the work on animal testing, well, who's testing on animals? That's not so much, it is consumer facing, absolutely, especially, I think there's been incredible success in the global movement to end cosmetic testing on animals because everyone uses cosmetics, and that was something that could really that was a campaign that could really appeal to individual people because we all touch it. For things that, I think there are other campaigns where you want to reach out to not the public, but specific to physicians or to researchers or to people in more technical fields. And I think for them, you absolutely have to approach it with science. So again, it's about speaking the language that they're used to speaking. And I still think that can be considered a grassroots campaign sometimes, because if it's an individual group of students, neuroscience students like working on this at their university who feel strongly about this and they're reaching out to their professors and to their classmates, that's a grassroots campaign. And yes, it has to be science-based because of the audience that's involved. Does that make sense?
Yep, makes complete sense. Makes complete sense. Thank you. We had a question about, I don't know if you're familiar with the paid to view videos. They were wondering if you thought it was still an effective form of advocacy, and if there are any paid to view videos that are effective at this time. Any thoughts about that?
I'm super interested in the topic, but I'm afraid that I don't have a lot of knowledge of the data on this. I know that VegFund is doing some interesting work around that, Leslie, so can I punt that one back to you?
Sure. Yeah. So for that question, we at least, at a minimum, we have a list of videos that the activist community finds compelling or, popular to put out there to the community. As I said, this behavior change work is really tricky. So one thing we are trying to work on now is a very brief survey that we've actually constructed for film screenings that we're in the process of rolling out. So what would happen is, one would watch one of our sponsored films, and then we're hoping that the participants will take a very brief survey. Okay, brief, it's probably 10 questions or so. A survey after the fact on SurveyMonkey, and we'll be collecting those results. So we'd like to power forward and do that same thing in pay-per-view by seeing if we can capture the viewer's attention long enough to create a survey. Again, we're with these kind of one size fits all type of tools, we're not going to capture necessarily what's happening to that person and the continuation of their choices, or how effective that video may be for the end of time, but it'll give us some information kind of post viewer or post viewing immediate feedback that we might be able to do something with and find useful. So, it's ever changing. We generally find that some of our films, they tend to be shown for maybe 18 months to 2 years or so. There are some that really have some pretty good longevity, but then the activist community tends to want to move on to the next great, new thing, even though that content might be really compelling. So it changes all the time, what works and what is popular. And we don't know a lot, but we're hoping that the survey tool might give us at least some glimpses of the, I don't want to say the popularity, but the effectiveness of the content to a particular viewer. So thank you.
And I think that's, as I was saying earlier, like we're still trying to figure out how to measure things. And I think this is one of the things that we try, and we see if it's effective and if it ends up being a good measure. I would say I wouldn't get too disappointed if you put out a survey like that and you're not getting the results you want, that it looks like people have not been impacted by it. I know for myself, and I think it's true for a lot of people, you watch something, it takes some time to process that. And so it doesn't do anything for you right away. So maybe the way that you respond on your survey is like, I don't know, this was kind of like, I don't know what this was about. But you keep thinking about it. And so 3 days from now, 5 days from now, it might have an impact on you and you might keep thinking about it. So I think these tools are great and we have to keep working on developing them. But I also, if the survey results came back and they didn't look fabulous, I still wouldn't be disappointed and I still wouldn't throw out pay-per-view as a tool.
Yeah. Well, all information is information, right? So that's the point of a survey, not necessarily to get what you think you want to see, but just to get information so that you can, improve upon your efforts or what you're doing. So yeah, thanks for those comments. Someone asked, do you know of any free courses provided for new vegans? I'm not sure if that question, Vegio Ama, if you can clarify, do you mean on how to be an activist or how to stay vegan? Maybe a little clarification may assist us, but do you know of any free course content or something that you have learned about out there in helping you stay vegan, or how to be a new vegan activist or anything?
Oh my gosh, there's so many resources out there on from cookbooks to, from recipes. I think every major animal protection group has kind of a vegan veg guide with tips on how to be vegan and what you can buy and what you can eat and how you can replace things. Tiffany just pointed out nutritionfacts.org is a really great resource and it's free. Mm-hmm. And then there are a lot of local community groups. I think Peace Advocacy Network, I think their courses are free as well. So yeah, lots of great resources on the web.
Yeah, there really are a lot of things, which kind of ties into another question. Do you feel pretty confident that, the plant-based movement and the fact that we increasingly, hear the word vegan in the mainstream, whether it's in media or whether it's in restaurants, do you feel as if this is a passing fad, or do you think it's here to stay?
I think it's here to stay. I have been vegan for, close to 25 years now, but I was vegetarian before that my entire life. And the way food choices have changed for me just over the course of my lifetime is incredible. I don't think about where I need to go anymore. Like, do I have to plan out my food anymore? Pretty much anywhere I go in the world, there's a wide availability of vegan food. And we thought it was really funny, before the pandemic, we'd gone hiking in Montana, in Glacier National Park. And every one of like the park restaurants or park cafes had things that were labeled as vegan, which we thought was just such a huge shift and something that you wouldn't have seen, even 10 years ago. There's no way. I'm not even sure if we would have seen it like 7 or 8 years ago. But I just think it shows the growing awareness of veganism, and also the growing number of vegans, or people who are just maybe not vegan all the time, but who want vegan foods a lot of the time.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, when you start to see it show up literally everywhere, I think it does suggest that we're not going to go backward, right? We might go forward not as quickly as we would like, but just the resources and the opportunities are showing up in really mainstream places. And I can't see any reason why that would roll back at this point. Deanna Mirle, who is with the Peace Advocacy Network, she said they have a lot of resources on their website, including starter guides that can be downloaded. And my colleagues at VegFund rightly pointed out that we have a lot of resources. It's like, oh yeah, there's ourselves, including recommended veg pledges. So there are lots of opportunities out there to help them build the momentum and keep people kind of in the the vegan base and continuing to grow from there. What else do we have? I don't know. Do we have any other questions from the audience? I want to give you an opportunity to throw in your questions before I monopolize the conversation. Anyone? What about, just quickly, what about your work with Spring Point Partners? Did you want to talk about that for a moment, or would you rather not, since you're here in your personal capacity?
Well, I am, but happy to talk about it. It's been a great experience. While I'm largely focused now in the companion animal welfare space, I work for a social impact venture that works on animal welfare, but also works on a range of other issues, from environmental issues, looking at criminal justice reform, looking at a lot of issues around racial inequities in this country, education. And I'm actually the only kind of full-time animal welfare person on the staff. And it's really great to be learning from other movements and learning from other campaigns, and also seeing kind of the overlap between all of our work, and hopefully in the future, trying to bring more of these movements together and working more intersectionally across movements. And hopefully that will, be outside of Spring Point and translate to the vegan movement as well. I'd love to see us doing more work intersectionally.
Yeah, I kind of wonder as well if that wouldn't help broaden the funding base, because Tiffany is saying, hey, how can we be more successful when applying for funding for our community program? And I think it's fair to say that the funding just for vegan outreach alone is pretty limited. And I'm hoping perhaps if we take a more intersectional approach, that might help open up, kind of funding opportunities really for everyone, as well as just drive efficiencies in project implementation.
We're seeing that more in the companion animal space. Historically, it was just like, cat and dog people who wanted to fund that space, people who really wanted to rescue animals. But now, as that sector, the companion animal welfare sector, has done a better job of really showing people that pets are a part of our families and they're so important to our health and to our welfare, have been able to create partnerships with groups that provide, combining pet pantries with food pantries for people, working with housing insecurity organizations to make sure that people with pets also are able to find housing. So there are some unique partnerships that are forming, and therefore new funding opportunities that are opening up. So I think, veganism is even more connected than that to human welfare, right? So I think if we start creating partnerships with other sectors, we'll see more funding opportunities open up.
Yeah. So Veggie Eddie is posting that he's advocated a vegan diet to doctors and none of them are willing to convert. So I don't know, perhaps this intersectionality would somehow come into play in terms of convincing more of the medical community, to get on board as well. I think in all cases, whether it's, this absolute grassroots activism or working more with institutions, you have to listen and try to find their sweet spot. And sometimes that sweet spot is very incremental, it's incremental progress. So I know, it's easy to feel very frustrated, but I think if we take signs from the marketplace, going hiking in Glacier National Park and seeing vegan menu items, explicitly listed on the menu is progress, even if it's slow and incremental. So I think I'm hopeful as well. I agree with you. So, I just wanted to ask you, could you explain to folks what social impact ventures means?
I don't know. I think I have a different definition every day, but I will tell you that we use a mix of tools that are available to us. So it's not just grant making, but it's also investing, and it's also direct programmatic work or convening people to have an impact on the social issues that are most important to us. So we, just to give you one example of something that we're doing, as I mentioned, I work a lot in the companion animal welfare space right now, is bringing together, there's a lot of barriers to accessing veterinary care in lower income communities. And those same communities face barriers to accessing early childhood education, whether it be really good daycare or preschool. And so bringing those partners together so they can, partners who are kind of addressing both of those issues together so they can talk about what different business models that they're using, different programming that they're using to really address the very same barriers. So that's what they're doing. That's what the organization I work for is a little bit of what we're doing. But I think so much of that, again, is applicable to the vegan space, right? I really think there's a lot that we could learn from other movements, other health-based movements, whether they're anti-smoking, smoking cessation movements or whatever it is. We have so much to learn from others and so many ways in which we can collaborate.
So in your various roles, have you worked much on policy, and how effective have you seen it be to try to change policy?
I think it's a really important tool. I think every tool that we use is really critical. Policy in terms of government policy, the challenge is that there's kind of a floor to what you can get. It can never be really that ambitious because there's so many stakeholders that you have to get on board and so many people that need to be appeased. And getting a law passed and getting that implemented is a whole different ballgame. So sometimes you get something passed and it's fantastic, but having it implemented in the way that you intended can be a challenge. That doesn't mean we don't do it. I think it's a critical tool. But I think it's one of the tools in our toolbox. Just, whether it's public policy, corporate policy, education, grassroots advocacy, I think they're all equally important.
Yeah, and really to your point, I mean, when you're working in a multi-stakeholder environment, in some respects, it comes all the way back to grassroots activism, where you've got to change hearts and minds because those stakeholders are coming in their person, right, from their communities. And so I think it circles back to the importance of grassroots outreach. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to change the mind of individuals who wear many different hats within a community or, through their profession or what have you. So there we go. I think hopefully it would be fair to say that it it gives a thumbs up to continued grassroots activism, even though it's really hard to measure. Super hard to measure behavior change, and it can feel super frustrating. But at the end of the day, I think it's really important to create that ripple effect in society that at the end of the day can change policies.
Absolutely. And I just want to thank everyone who's on this call and who's part of VegFund for everything that you're doing. I do think that grassroots activists are sometimes the unsung heroes of our movement, but I want to say, for whatever it's worth, that I see you and I value your work incredibly. And I don't think that we would have gotten this far without you, and I don't think we're going to get any farther without your work. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for those words of encouragement. We really appreciate it. And we at VegFund appreciate you. We're so delighted you're on our board. We're at 2:45 now, and these sessions usually go anywhere from a half hour to an hour. So we seem to be right in the middle of that. And we know you have a lot to do, and that you've trotted into your office today to have this conversation with us. So we appreciate that. And unless there are any other questions out there from the audience, I think we'll give it a wrap here. Okay, nothing else coming in. Chetana, thank you so much. Much appreciated. And thank you everyone out there for joining us today to hear what Chetana has to say. We're so appreciative. Oh, I will say, Tiffany wanted to throw in last minute that they partner with church ministries as faith-based settings are underutilized but have great resources, which is really, really a point when we're thinking about our communities. So thank you to everyone. Have a wonderful day. And we'll see you out there in your communities, funded by VegFund, we hope.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.